Sorry for all the notifications. That means it's really starting and really going on. I'm gonna go ping everybody to come on over. I just started this space, but just some background on who we're having over. We're having Daniel Ospina, who's one of the OGs, who's affiliated with Aragon DAO. DAO is a service. One of the most OG DAO toolings, and yeah, he's here today. Today we're gonna learn about research DAO, RN DAO. And yeah, let's give him the mic. How you doing? Thanks for coming out. We're gonna wait for a little people to trickle in. I just started the space exactly now, but yeah, let me just go ahead and let people know this is started. But in the meantime, thank you for coming on out. If you want to give a brief little introduction on your background, and yeah, while people are trickling in.
Sure, thanks. So I guess I'd take it a little bit long, like give a slightly longer version while everyone else gets here. But also, if everyone else would like to say hello, share a little bit of why you're here, what you're interested in learning, like feel free to ask, and I'll cut my intro a little bit shorter, and would love to hear what's bringing you here and what questions you have. The more this is a conversation, the more enjoyable it is for me. But anyway, my background, I actually started as a chef. I was very interested in creativity, and the food industry at the time seemed to be really exciting. It was kind of the big molecular cuisine, and you had this mix of science, technology, culture, aesthetics, sensuality, and so on coming together in the fine dining sector. And I thought that was really cool. But then when I joined the industry, what I realized is that a lot of the sort of mythical heroes that I had, and those were the places where I tried to go and get a job, is that they had been very creative once, but then at the moment they were mostly very stressed out. And then the other people, the younger people like myself, who were coming in full of ideas and full of passion and really wanted to make a difference or something, and there would be no one that would listen to us, because again, the people at the top were really stressed out, and so it was kind of like this very weird disconnect where they were very stressed out trying to come up with the next idea, and there was all of these young people with ideas, but that didn't know how to translate them to reality, and it wasn't clear whether the ideas were good or not. And what I end up discovering, then I move into research and development, and we did a few projects to try to understand how this pipeline of ideas was going from coming up with something that could be the next big thing, and then actually making it into the next big thing, and what would usually fail across that process. And one of the things that we realized is how much work it took to develop an idea. And instead of that, you had the younger people who, again, most of the time, no one would listen to them. No one would get them a platform or a chance to actually try out their ideas. And when they did get a platform, they were not supported in that development process to refine the idea, to improve it, to go through iterations, to learn about it, and actually make it into something worthwhile. So it consistently failed. And I thought that was a terrible human drama. And myself, I was very frustrated with it because I wanted to create stuff. And I, again, had all of these ideas, but there was no way to make any of that happen. So I ended up leaving that industry and started becoming really, really interested in organization design and roughly how groups of people can work together. So I've been doing that for about the last 10 years. End up falling into crypto and Web3 rabbit hole. I guess it was only a matter of time because these DAOs are the space where the most forward-thinking experiments are happening in terms of human collaboration. And so around 2018, I started to discover the industry. I tried to get in. It took me a while because I wasn't a developer. And back then, if you weren't a developer, the number of things you could do was very limited. That has a lot has changed now. And then it wasn't until 2020 that I started actually advising a project in governance and system design. This was a sustainability blockchain project, and through that, ended up meeting the folks at Aragon. They needed some help. I started to help them. then that leads to a new position being created for me as head of governance there, which I did for a little bit less than a year, helping them to design and launch their DAO, mostly from a governance perspective, and also advising the product team on the future of DAOs. We're trying to understand these. And while I was doing that, I started to think again on one place I had worked in the past. That was an experimental kitchen, and it was a really cool space where you had on the ability to prototype things really quickly. You could have the kitchen, you could cook stuff, try it out yourself, but you also had a part of an office and a lot of networks and collaborations with neuroscientists and historians and people who work in perfumes and so on, and all of these diversity of ideas that really made a difference for the sort of food that was being created. I mean, coincidentally, this was the sort of innovation department of a company that has a restaurant that got voted best restaurant of the world in 2005. So quite an innovation powerhouse, really. And so I started to think that a model like that would really make sense in Web3 and in the DAO world, where you could have fast prototyping, but also a broad network with a lot of diversity and different mindsets and different expertise to figure out the complex questions of how do we reinvent human collaboration and all the things that come into that, from the legal side, the economic side, management, leadership, all of these different things that you kind of need to bring together to make it work. And so I started to try to put together that team at the time for the benefit of Aragon, but it very quickly became apparent to me that, well, on one side, Aragon has a very complicated culture, and I didn't feel it was the right culture to seed this initiative and to really create a more humanistic future. And I decided to leave and do it on my own. But then the other thing was that the amount of research and insights that you can get with such a thing is so broad that a single product team will never be able to apply it. So instead of that, you could collaborate with multiple product teams and even have your own quick prototyping team to try things out. And that way reduce a little bit what's happening right now. That is a lot of these different DAOs kind of reinventing the wheel, a lot of DAOs doing research, but they're all doing it with limited resources, without enough diversity, without enough depth and expertise on how to do very good research. So they arrive to a lot of conclusions which are quite often not very good, and then end up creating products that are not very useful, and a lot of those products fail or end up creating practices for their DAO that are not very good and are counterproductive and so on. And I thought that instead of that, we could get a way to collaborate and to exchange knowledge across all of these different DAOs and experiments and have a little bit of focus to do it better. We could really support the ecosystem in creating better organizations and better ways for people to collaborate. So that was kind of like the beginning of Aran DAO, which was roughly in December, January. We started meeting with a few folks that came together with me. Some left Aragon and continued, some others I had met in the ecosystem, and we just kind of came together and funded this thing that is a sort of research and development DAO. So we do research about how to DAO, research on DAO operations and governance, and then DAO tooling incubation. So it's very focused about that space, and that's roughly what brings us to now, after a very long introduction, I guess.
Yeah, I love hearing that journey. And even since I first contacted you about Aragon, like I think it was over a year ago. The tooling in the DAO landscape, the amount of DAOs that have emerged, the amount of change that have had, DAO infrastructure has completely changed, and you kind of saw like the emergence of people making DAOs like they used to make tokens. And I kind of wanted to get your perspective on like kind of in your time since Aragon, how have DAOs evolved, and then yeah, how this may have been a benefit or may have diluted kind of the core of what they of what's happening in the space.
Yeah, a very cool question and great to reflect on. I'm gonna speak off the top of my head, but a few of the things I seen is when I first started, kind of like more full on in the industry, and finally made completely the transition, DAOs were still a lot smaller niche than they are today. I mean, it's still a tiny niche compared to what I believe they will be in 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now. We're seeing a very likely an exponential growth curve here, and later on I can speak as to why I believe that's the case, or at least the reasons that as long as those fundamentals don't change, that will be the case. But there has been a lot of growth. And with that, there has been a dilution of some of the original ethos. Like the earlier community around DAOs was extremely focused on the idea of decentralization of power, on autonomy or self-sovereignty, and some of these ideals. While some of the people that have come later are a little bit more mixed. You have some who are like true believers. They really believe in reinventing human organizations and finding different ways for people to collaborate. You're others who are coming for the hype, and they're seeing that DAOs can be big business and make money, and it's kind of like an exciting thing, and they're coming for the opportunity, but not necessarily for the purpose. And so that has also led to a little bit of a frustration as well that's happened because the tooling hasn't evolved as fast as one would have expected. There has been a lot of tooling developed. A lot of it is not very good. And I mean, developing DAO tooling is hard. This is not to talk badly about the people working in this area, but it's more that the tooling hasn't been able to keep up with people expectations. So at the beginning, there was kind of like this hope that this would be a huge human renaissance and everything was going to change because suddenly we could vote through a token. And now people are realizing that actually that doesn't really work, and it's really and that human organization is a more complex problem. And sometimes you have voter apathy, or sometimes you have malicious proposals. And then the fact that you can vote doesn't necessarily mean that people get along, and you can have conflict, and you need to figure out how to do conflict resolution. And then the other thing is you realize that having a single decision-making mechanism and having to vote on everything is very slow and demands a lot of attention from a lot of people. So it's not particularly fast or efficient. And so the other thing that's started to happen as a response of that has been the fractalization of DAOs, or the whole idea of creating smaller pods or sub-DAOs. But on the, let's say on the more negative side, there's been a lot of, or a huge move around progressive decentralization, which in some situations kind of make sense. But for me, most of the time, is just a way for people to say, oh no, we're still a DAO, we're just progressively decentralizing, and we'll get there one day, which is kind of like mañana, but that tomorrow, that time might never come. And unless you're taking very concrete action right now to start doing that, then you're only talking, but you're not walking the talk, which is a lot of what I'm seeing. And the regulatory uncertainty, or let's say the fact that if you look more decentralized, you're less likely to get the Securities and Exchange Commission from the US probing at you, or some of those things that could be a disaster for your business. So there is multiple reasons for why people might want to pretend that they're more a DAO than they are. And equally, because that's become a little bit the situation, there has been all of these entrepreneurs that have arrived to Web3, and they haven't really taken the time to understand what it's about, and they just start businesses. And when we were in the bull market, they could get a lot of money from VCs very quickly. Like, someone leaves Facebook, and within 3 months, they have raised multiple millions. And it's nice that people get an opportunity to play, and it's nice that capital is flowing to this space because it allows us to play and create things. But the risk is that a lot of these entrepreneurs don't really understand DAOs, and they end up creating tools that have nothing of the ethos, that are not relying on blockchain technology. They're really just a front end with a very centralized back end. The sort of processes that they enable for people are very top-down, centralized, a lot of bounties with a manager and an admin. And so this manager or admin has all the power, and you're just reproducing hierarchies, and you're reproducing a lot of the issues that corporations have, which have sort of the advantage of being familiar to all of this new wave of people who haven't necessarily taken the time to learn about these new ideas. And a lot of it needs to be invented still. So because it's kind of easier path, it has grown a lot, but it grows at the detriment of what Web3 could be if we're a little bit more careful and try to immerse ourselves and understand and ask the hard questions. And at that case, we might actually have a real chance to reinvent human organizations and to enable people better ways to collaborate and to fight plutocracy and all of these kind of things. But again, that kind of requires doing a little bit of hard work. And I think we're losing that battle somewhat, which saddens me. Although the space is growing a lot. And to some degree, that was always meant to happen. If you think of organic tomatoes, like maybe 20, 30 years ago, organic tomatoes were grown by some small commune of hippies outside of society. And then in the supermarket, you just had the most pesticide full tomatoes that you have ever imagined. Now you have organic tomatoes in supermarket, but those organic tomatoes are very different from the ones that the hippie commune used to cultivate. Now they're wrapped in 10 layers of plastic. So the idea of organic has been bastardized a lot. And somewhat like that is what's happening to DAOs. Is the idea of the DAO is likely to continue to be bastardized and become a little bit of everything and nothing. However, if you look at the supermarket and you say, well, in that shelf, there could be a semi-organic tomato. It pretends to be fully organic, but we know it's not fully that, and it has 3 layers of plastic and whatever. That is still progress than the tomatoes that were in that same shelf before. And if people are flocking to create some of like semi DAOs, that's still better than people starting fully top-down traditional companies. But it is worse than if we were actually inventing proper DAOs. So it kind of depends on all of our choices every day and the actions that we take. So hopefully we can create platforms and methods and knowledge and guidebooks and services and so on for everyone who actually wants to join these and take the right path. Because it's also, if you're trying to start a business, it's not necessarily easy. So it requires a lot of support. And that's partially what we're trying to build and why we conceive our DAO as a platform where people could incubate DAO tooling projects. So these Web2 entrepreneurs, they don't need to go and start on their own, but they can join our organization or others like it and incubate from within our platform with a lot of the research and resources that we have accumulated, the contacts and so on. And that way we can nudge them to create tools that are taking more, let's say, Web3 principles and heart, that are really making sure that we are disrupting hierarchies and creating better ways to distribute power, better ways for people to collaborate and generally advance this mission, which we don't have all the answers, but I do believe that working together, we can do much, much better than just trying to move really fast, break things and doing things in our own and trying to keep the whole pie for ourselves.
Yeah, and so something I've seen and even like 2 years ago we're really, and this is something we've been struggling with because of the tooling and honestly like converting a traditional organization into a DAO. There's a lot of complexities that a DAO adds and a lot of limitations based on the tooling. And yeah, there has been progress, but one of the key things that we're looking for when we're converting to a DAO is not only you know, set, privacy first and foremost, especially when you're dealing with certain amount of deals and deal flow, but then also the ability for internal groups to have decisions through sub DAOs, through councils, role delegation, but also reputation. I think this is something that RNDAO is definitely looking at. And there really wasn't too much toolings, and then there's the dispute resolution that you mentioned. There's also the idea of multiple treasuries and multiple treasuries existing across different chains. That's something like that we're experiencing. Like, how exactly do we build an organization with assets and fiat assets across different chains, different subgroups and different stakeholders, different levels of privacy. It really, the DAO tooling isn't there at all. So I kind of want to highlight a little bit about like maybe the latest tools that you see that really help, you know, that really help fill these gaps, or whether it's in the privacy space, or I'm more likely to see the reputation space, because I'm not sure if there has been much progress on a dispute resolution. And I don't, there has been cross chain tooling, but cross chain DAO tooling like isn't barely there. A lot of these chains with DAO tooling, like they don't even have fund delegation and sub councils, or the ability to, you know, own NFTs as a group, or invest in DeFi protocols like that within its own chain isn't there. So like cross chain tooling is for DAOs is generally like non-existent or underdeveloped. But on the like on the reputation side, and the privacy side, like do you kind of have any insights on that?
I mean, unfortunately, I would say that it's still very early days. There is some interesting work that the folks at Vogdoni were doing on cross-chain DAO tooling, and let's say the ability for a DAO based on Arbitrum to make transactions with a treasury based on Ethereum or something like that. But it's still early days for that, and it will require longer for it to mature. In terms of the reputation tooling, I think it's kind of like at a similar stage where there is a lot of different organizations emerging who are doing interesting things, but it is not at a point where is let's say is a sort of thing that is ready for production at scale, and I would freely recommend for DAOs and be like, oh yeah, just use that and work with it. And part of the reason is because a lot of the approach for reputation that I see many organizations taking, and I don't mean like the DAOs themselves, I mean more like the tooling projects, whether they're a DAO or not is irrelevant for this case, but is that they're really thinking about reputation in terms of have you completed bounties before? And and that's not really the crux of the issue. Like, yeah, it is good to know that if someone has completed 3-4 UX bounties, they probably know a thing or two about UX, but that's relatively easy to find anyway. You can ask them for a portfolio and they'll show you the portfolio, and you'll have some impersonators and so on, but generally that's not a huge problem. And it's not a huge problem compared to, will this person be a good team player? Will they collaborate well with the rest of the team? Do they have a good character, a good culture? Do they know how to engage with others, or are they problematic, and are they going to be complaining all the time and talking badly about others behind their backs and so on? Or are they going to be, I don't know, creating space for difficult conversations and for processing tension? And do they have emotional intelligence and all of the other more subtle things that can make 10x the difference for a contributor? And I have yet to see any tool that is doing anything in that direction. With Katerina that we have here, we started a thing for community health analytics that works a little bit on the network graph, what we call organizational network analysis, or the, let's say, the social graph between the people, and can give you through that graph, like through seeing who's talking with whom and mapping that out, can give you a bit of a perspective of what role people play within a DAO or within a network. And then before, there was the SourceCred that used somewhat that sort of technology to calculate a reputation or a cred score, which was interesting. But then SourceCred had the Google PageRank algorithm, and a lot of people hated that because they felt that an algorithm was ranking them. So there's those different things there. I know Orange Protocol is making some progress and so on. I had a friend who was working at Skill Wallet. I haven't spoken with them in a while. I don't know where they're at exactly. So there is a bunch of things emerging, but we'll probably see another 6 months before they mature, at least, I think.
So what is, and so like the source credit example is, and just for reference, they essentially took like Discord and GitHub, these Web2 applications, and essentially developed a way for you to reward cred within in your ecosystem. So what do you like? Is that what you see? Like, do you see like what is reputation going to be taking these Web2 platforms and then putting it on chain for people to index, or is it going to be on chain interactions? Like, how exactly do we begin to even develop a reputation system? Do we need KYC? Do we need an aggregation of people's identities across different chains and ecosystems? Like, how do we begin um, to develop someone's reputation?
Sure. So I would say that we don't necessarily need KYC, and the it it depends what we're trying to do. But the thing with reputation is that it is meant to be something valuable, and you want to have more of it or better of it. So if you have a bad actor, if the system is working properly, they'll get a bad reputation, and maybe they'll go and create a new identity. But if you see someone that has no history whatsoever, no track record whatsoever, there is no one who has vouched for them, they have no reputation, that is not going to generate a lot of trust. So by the very mechanism of reputation, you already have something people have an interest in preserving the same identity, and that can have some let's say some dangers, in that you want to ensure that people can have some privacy about which parts of their identity they display and so on, because otherwise you're exposing a tremendous amount of data about yourself, and that can have other risks. But generally speaking, I don't think that, let's say, making sure that it's a unique human is the most pressing problem. For certain situations where we're talking about legal matters, or like, let's say, securities laws or things like that, the KYC might be important, but that's a secondary consideration. In terms of the reputation, we are with the community health project, we're actually emulating a little bit the source code approach of taking multiple platforms, whether they're Web2 or Web3, and gathering data from there. And the reason for that is that you can have, or at least at the moment, the data that is on chain is transactions data. And if you think about your life, how often are you paying for something? Like, how often do you purchase something? That would be your on-chain data. If all of that went on chain, you maybe buy something. I don't know. If you buy a lot of things, maybe you're buying 3 times a day. You buy your transport ticket to go to an office, or to go to a friend's house, or to go somewhere. You maybe buy a drink or a meal or something like that. But that's about it. It's maybe 3-4 transactions a day in average can already be a significant number, while the number of times that you message someone, that you exchange a conversation, we're talking in the thousands, like just the number of those interactions. So through conversational data, you have a lot more data, like a lot more detail on actually what's the behavior of someone than you would have with purely transactions data. So as there are protocols like, let's say, Lens protocol, for example, that start to mature, maybe we'll have more conversational data or interaction behavioral data that is on chain, and that will come to complement the transactions data, like financial data. And at that point, that might become more interesting. But at least right now, and for the foreseeable future, because for many applications or many communities, they might not have a strong enough incentive to migrate all of their interactions fully on chain. It might not even be necessary. Like, you don't necessarily want to have the message you DM a colleague stored in the blockchain forever. There is, it's debatable whether that's good or bad. The fact is that, at least for the short term, it's not going to happen, or not going to be all of them. So you want to have a mix of these things, and perhaps include some POAPs on one side, include the sort of track record or the transactions that people have received, if they completed a bounty, and so on. So I would say it's more about mixing platforms and mixing data sources, but then also not taking that data at face value, but starting to dig into it and asking, what does this mean about someone? because it's not just about the numbers. Like when we think of, is someone a good community member, someone who writes a lot of messages? If they don't write any messages, well, they're not engaged with the community. That's for sure. But if someone is writing too many messages, maybe they're just noisy and they're annoying other people. Do you prefer someone who writes a little bit less and every message is really thoughtful and makes a big difference? Yeah, probably. But it depends. You will have to go a lot into the details and understand what this means. So a lot of attention needs to be placed into how the data is interpreted.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of go off on that point. I think what Lens Protocol is doing is very interesting. Creating every like follower interaction, likes, reposts, curating into NFTs, and actually linking into Web2 platforms, so you can see the social graph. I think that was people will start to develop reputation from that. But I wanted to get an essence of like the communication platforms, and we saw this heavily with NFT communities, where the heart of the NFT community was their Discord. And similarly, like DAOs, it's really hard to organize a DAO. A lot of it's contingent on platforms that you're using. So I wanted to get a sense of like what exactly you think is most effective for you know DAO communication, and then also going kind of to the concept of messaging protocols, because there are like in Solana you see dialect, you see people leveraging IPFS to transfer messages and using that. Snapshot kind of did this famously in terms of gasless governance, and so like what is the ideal communication platform and the way data should be messaged across stakeholders in Web3s, or for DAOs in general?
The way I'm seeing it, there are two different approaches, or maybe three different approaches that are advancing. But the two main ones is contributor first, and the second one is a DAO first. So in the DAO first approach is the DAO who designs which channels. So let's say if it's a discourse or a forum, then the DAO administrator or whoever, whichever way is doing it, maybe the DAO in the future could directly organize these through proposals. At the moment, is some admin who's empowered to do that. And so this admin decides what are the topics, and they sort of create these boxes, and people can join the box and they can discuss within the box. But they're designing which conversations are kind of like a highway and have a lot of space and are really encouraged, and which conversations are a sort of dirt road that is a small thing on the side, or you almost have to go against the current and against the flow to have that conversation. And so with this DAO first approach, you can actually design your organization and design the sort of behaviors that you want to encourage or not in your community by simply creating channels for them, or creating categories for them, or making it easier or harder to find a space that is welcoming for a certain type of conversation. And that's tremendously powerful to design and orient these things. The other approach, which is more contributor first, is a little bit more how, let's say, WhatsApp feels like compared to Slack, to talk about Web2 tools, or how Telegram feels as opposed to Discord, where it's a little bit more all the channels that the user have, and is the user who chooses which channels to join or not. And there is, for example, in this regard of more recent DAO tooling, I checked Avenue. And what Avenue was trying to do was create some sort of feeds, and you could follow the feeds of certain DAOs, but you didn't need to go into the Discord of the DAO and see the full complexity of it. And there is a few others who are trying to do things like these that are a little bit more contributor centric. In practice, I see merits for both things, because if you're trying to design an organization and have an organization that is successful, you do need to have this ability to have certain highways and other spaces. And ideally as well, you want to give people a lot of flexibility. So some of the really cool patterns are the ability to create threads or create subspaces, Or, for example, in Google Docs, you can make a comment and then that comment becomes a thread and you can reply to that comment and so on, and then you can close the comment. So you have this ability to create pockets or side conversations that can go as deep or not as you want. And this is really the key. I think we're still very far from seeing the perfect communication platform for DAOs, and like really, really far. We only have a few prototypes that I have seen that are starting to get here. And Discord has many issues. I mean, it's obviously not designed for DAOs. I think that's painfully obvious for anyone that's spent more than a few hours there. But right now is unfortunately still the best tool I seen. And I'm hoping this will change soon. But right now, if I was gonna start again, I would probably end up defaulting to Discord again, which I'm not particularly proud to say, but it requires quite a bit of quite a bit of development to create all the basic functionalities that are needed.
Yeah, and just plug it out there. RNDAO is also on Discord, so go check that out. And there's also been a lot of developments towards, and this goes back to the POAP concept. Like there's been things like Matrica and Great Protocol on Solana, Collabland on Ethereum that essentially give access to these channels based on POAPs, and that's what you mentioned as a tool, like a proof of attendance protocol or proof of presence, or just a proof of an event. Like a lot of different protocols are kind of developing their own POAP. What's your thoughts on like just POAPs and their or even badges and soulbound NFTs to facilitate access and roles within DAOs, and how effective that can be?
I actually like them. Like at some point in RNDAO is not super active at the moment, but at some point we had started developing a product that asks people to go through a learning journey. So go through a series of micro pieces of content, like short videos or something like that. And after they completed that learning journey, they would get a POAP, and that would give them access to certain parts of the DAO. So it was kind of like a way to do onboarding, and you could divide your onboarding into multiple pieces. And then people will gain different POAPs that give them access to that, because you don't necessarily want someone joining the governance process without at least watching a 5-minute video of how governance works. Otherwise, they'll be quite lost and can end up adding a lot of noise or asking questions that the video will answer and so on. And so I see, that's to say that it's kind of like, I guess, the proof that I do see some merit in this kind of thing, because I engaged with it in the past. But it is also a limited approach in that we're still missing more systems that are a little bit more granular, let's say, on when do they give a POAP and not. And in that, one of the protocols or new developments that I'm the most excited about is HATS protocol, that is using NFTs as permission management. And so you can mint a hat, which is essentially a role, and that role can have sub roles, and you can choose conditions to give those roles and conditions to remove them, and so on. And hopefully, if this works well, either HATS or something like HATS will end up integrating with the permission management of a lot of the other tooling. And so you can have your, I don't know, your Twitter admin or your Discord admin or whatever tool that your DAO admin is using. It could be a lot of more Web3 tools that is using. And the access and the management of that will all be based on on-chain permission management. So your DAO could directly vote or have different mechanisms to attribute this power to certain people and then remove it if they are misusing it or if they are leaving or something like that. So I really encourage you to check this one out. As far as the kind of like non-transferable tokens, like the SBTs or things like that, the issue continues to be recoverability. Like if your wallet is hacked, it's great. The tokens cannot be transferred, but then what do you do? Do you stay with a compromised wallet that's not going to work? So you lose the whole thing, and how do you transfer it? So I'm not super bullish on the SBTs, at least not for this use case. I find that things that have more control and that you can regain, let's say, for example, if you got hacked and you lost your hat using this protocol or something like that, well, the DAO could destroy the previous hat and mint a new one for you, which obviously would be a pain, but at least it would be possible.
And so one thing I wanted to cover is like a lot of times, especially in research, what is precedent, what case you can look at. So I wanted to get a sense of learn a little bit more about R
Sorry,
the
I
DAOs.
don't know if it's my signal, but I couldn't pick up what you were
Yeah,
saying.
and so one of the things, especially when researching like how to develop a DAO, or researching anything in general, we like to look at case studies, like what are successful instances of DAOs in the past.
Yeah. So
Significant. So
oh yeah, sorry, you cut it again a little bit. I understood that you were saying like successful case studies of DAOs in the past.
yeah, and then a little bit about like how your team at RNDAO or your community is like using those or to improve in your process.
Thanks. So I tend to believe one thing is I tend to believe that DAOs are yet to be fully invented. So there is a lot of things that we can learn from, a lot of other DAOs that are doing cool experiments, a lot of organizations that don't call themselves DAOs that have existed throughout history, and there is tremendous amount of learning there because at the end of the day, humans are still largely operating the same way that we have been doing for thousands of years. But then what you can learn from the case studies is what was done in the past, and that was not necessarily created from a perspective of let's look at all the options and pick the one that works best for us. It's more contextual, like kind of what ended up happening at the time, what sort of beliefs people had, what sort of constraints they had in terms of time, in terms of copying other practices that seem familiar to them, and so on. And so you can end up with a lot of best practices who are actually very mediocre practices. So the way we look at it, and I'll give a few examples for inspiration in a second of different organizations that you can look into. But the way we try to approach it is we look on one side, we look a lot at the academic research because it's rigorous and there is a lot of thinking and attention that has been placed to figure out that there is causation and not just correlation in different things. So actually something is happening because of this reason and not just at the same time, but is an accident. So you can say like, oh, a lot of like a lot of successful DAOs are being led this way, but maybe the reason they are successful is because they raise a lot of money and not because of the way the leadership is operating. They might be successful despite the leadership. So it's kind of important to take that into account and looking at this. So we look a lot at academic research, and we also look a lot at different case studies across self-management, across the world of cooperatives, across system thinking, different approaches and frameworks and models there. But then we try to boil it down to first principles. Like, what do these case studies fundamentally teach us at the universal level, like at the atomic level? What does this mean? And not just copy the practices, because then you fall into this trap of just reproducing what was, and again, maybe you're copying the way someone does leadership, and their organization succeeded despite the way they were doing leadership and not thanks to it. But a few that I find that are really, really interesting to understand DAOs for me is Hire is probably the number one example. They're a Chinese white goods manufacturing company, huge company, like 80,000 employees. And they have broken down into more than 4,000, maybe by now 5,000 micro enterprises that are buying and selling services to each other. And it's a really, for a Web2 company, this is light years ahead of the majority of the market. Then the world of self-management has a lot of interesting things there, but one needs to take it with a pinch of salt because the narrative is very, very evangelistic, is very, very positive, and then in practice it can take a lot of energy to actually implement these practices because it requires a lot on everyone in the organization doing a lot of personal development and having quite a bit of emotional intelligence. And you want to aspire and work towards that, but you don't want to be dependent on that because quite often that's not the case. And it's hard to do it. So although I like, for example, in every community I end up joining, I end up recommending to everyone to watch this video about nonviolent communication, which for me should be kind of like the baseline of the curriculum to join DAOs. Like anyone who hasn't watched these should first watch it and not be allowed to join a DAO without. I would almost go that extreme. But even when you do things like that, the self-management world needs to be taken with a small pinch of salt. And then in terms of DAOs, I like quite a bit what Index Corp is doing. Although I have never joined their DAO, I just seen some of the documents they put out. Yearn was doing some interesting things as well, or at least they were one of the people who started doing fractalization and sub DAOs early, and that's just a necessary pattern. If you look at system science, you'll see that it's absolutely necessary. And it was only a matter of time before it emerged, but they started in that road and they sensed into that a lot faster. Then I quite like as well Common Stack and some of the primitives that they were developing. I thought they were super cool, and I often look out to them. And as well the DAO House ecosystem and Moloch, they're doing a lot of interesting, good things that I think anyone could learn a thing or two from. And well, obviously come and check us out and check out Aaron DAO. We're constantly doing research on how to DAO, so I would hope that at least we got something right.
Awesome. I do have to step for the next meeting. I wanted to cover kind of two brief things. Well, firstly, like how to get involved in RNDAO. What are kind of the main activities that you are doing, and then also in the past year since we've talked, there's been a lot of progression with DAO legal wrapper stat. That's what everyone wants to know. They want to turn their business into a DAO. Wyoming, I think Tennessee may have had the kind of wrapper around DAO. So what can you kind of go over about RNDAO and then just about how laws have progressed with DAOs?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of joining RNDAO, just look for us in Twitter, and in the Twitter bio you have the link to join. Is RNDAO RNDAO __. It's fairly easy to find, and you'll find your path. If you're lost and you cannot find it, feel free to DM me and I'll send you the link, or I'll help you find your way in. We're super open community, like very close to permissionless. So you're welcome to join and participate and get involved. We try to be, or pride ourselves in trying to be welcoming and warm to newcomers. Then in terms of legal wrappers, there is a lot going on, but mostly US based. For non-US based things that someone might want to do, I recommend checking out Otoko or Autonomous. They're actually the same company with two names, depending on which side you approach them. And they have created a bunch of sort of ready-made templates for different geographies and so on that are relatively low cost and can work pretty well. And now, actually, for what we are trying to do at RNDAO, we're realizing that a lot of the regular options that people are using don't work for us. So we are working with a couple of lawyers, and maybe we'll end up creating a new legal template that hopefully will be open source for other communities to be able to use. But that's going to take some time. I mean, still regulatory speaking, we're in super early stages, and it might take a couple of years for a lot of these to stabilize, especially outside of the US. And it's kind of annoying because the US regulation impacts every other geography, but it's really not the best in terms of like their securities law, and it can have a lot of issues in my opinion, but it's tremendously influential. So we're still largely bound by them setting the agenda.
Awesome. Yeah, no, this is a very interesting conversation. I do have to go unless anyone wants to take up as co-host. But
Yeah.
yeah, check out Aaron,
No.
or if you want to.
Thank. Sorry, there is a small delay in the line.
Yeah, so I do have to end the space right now. One of my meetings just started. But yeah, if anyone wants to take as a co-host and continue to ask kind of questions, we can do that, or we can just end the space here. But make sure to check Aaron Dow. It's in the click on there, and Daniel's personal Twitter. Show him some love. A lot of great alpha. One of the people out here in the space that's really been prioritizing human contribution in DAOs and making sure that people are adding value in this space. So I would definitely check it out. And yeah, thank you so much for coming over here.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Unfortunately, I need to jump now. I'm also getting a little bit late. I need to go to a town hall, but thank you everyone for listening. Sorry I couldn't stick around a little bit longer for questions or something, but if you like to have a chat, if you have any questions, feel free to message me and I'll do my best to reply. Again, thanks for listening and have a lovely rest of the day, everyone.
Yeah.